Hello, I'm Scott Langdon. Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. This week on the program, we bring you Jerry's latest reflections by way of our regular series, From God to Jerry to You. In this installment, Jerry shares some relatively recent encounters with God that ultimately have to do with what's to come regarding the work God has for him. God tells Jerry to trust his spiritual senses when it comes to questions of how to proceed. When we wonder what to do next, God assures us that when we open our hearts and sincerely seek God's will for our life, our direction will be illuminated in our own lives, in our own way. God comes to each one of us differently, and always in a radically personal way. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Usually when I share something from God to Jerry to you, I'm starting right with the book. God and Autobiography is told to a philosopher. So one of the things in that God told me in that what I think of as the period of revelation, where God is just laying out this whole story, God's story, and along the way, what God was up to with the world's religions, as well as answering many of my kind of human and philosophical questions. So usually I start there, but of course, my life with God, like your life with God, doesn't just exist in some archive somewhere. It's an ongoing phenomenon. And it happened to me the other day that I spilled some water or something on a tablet that was just sitting here, and I had to clear up that water and save the tablet. And I looked to see what it was, and it was a little recording where I'd written down a kind of prayer exchange. It turns out this particular tablet, I have them around and I don't do it sequentially. If I'm going to pray, I just grab what one happens to be at hand. And this one was just sitting there in that informal fashion. Turned out to be from early August 2021. And I never remember what year things happen, but this turns out to be, it actually, these particular pages just start in early August of 2021 and happen to be right at the early stages of starting the podcast, God and Autobiography is Told to a Philosopher podcast. Scott Langdon had come my way as the first media consultant and then said, hey, this God and Autobiography is actually kind of dramatic, and he's an actor, and so why don't we, put it as a dramatic adaptation, and with the podcast. So this was all in the works in that period of time, and Scott and I were pretty new in working together, and so I'm trying to figure out how we're to work together. And along the way in that, I just thought I'd share this because I think Scott will like hearing it, and I kind of liked hearing it too. I'd completely forgotten this what I'd been told. But in praying about working with Scott, I was told, this is God to Jerry, and now to you. Scott is a good man. He is an instrument of my will. Okay, that sounds pretty good person to be working with, right? And in fact, God went on a little bit later, let Scott continue. God says to me to be the director or creative director of the project. And so he has been since that time right up to the present and hopefully into the future. So that's a kind of personal note between concerning the people who are bringing this podcast to you. But I was also, I can see about that time, starting to think to write my own book that ended up being radically personal, God and Ourselves in the New Axial Age. But it didn't have that title, didn't have any title yet. I was kind of just beginning to kind of fixate, kind of focus on possible what it should be. And so I praying about it just briefly. I didn't ask. This book is not dictated. It's mainly just me, but I pray as I go along. Am I on the right track and that sort of thing. And here I was kind of looking, how am I going to fix my attention on this project? And God's to Jerry says, you know what my message is and are perfectly capable of shaping it in various venues. In other words, a published book would be one way to bring the message forward. But God goes on, for this particular book, the emphasis is on trusting your own spiritual senses. Trusting your own spiritual senses. You know, the intuitions and perceptions and so forth that come to you as if they're not just made up by you, but are coming from a kind of divine source or some spiritual source. And the message is you have to trust those. And then as it turned out in Radically Personal, you know, I'm an epistemologist. We do theory of knowledge. I talk about an epistemics of trust, because as I thought about it philosophically, all knowledge begins trusting some kind of data. You know, you trust your perception or you'd never know there was a room around me. You trust your memory or you would just live in a split-second existence. And you can check those things because they're not infallible, but they're your basic sources. You trust your reasoning, or you couldn't even reason about whether to reason, whether reason is trustworthy. And you can correct your false reasoning. And that's one reason we engage in dialogue with one another, because we catch each other in mistakes. Well, anyway, so that ended up being a key part, a theme of Radically Personal. And then I see about six weeks later, these are often very episodic because I'm not praying every day. I'm often just going along and I pray quickly, what am I to do today or something, and feel I get marching orders, but don't write those things down. But I'm trying to look at this as 6 weeks later, still 2021, October. I'm told in prayer, God to Jerry, you should present boldly what you really believe the future of religions to be and what the role of theology will be, should be in the future. And of course, that's the Theology Without Walls project is expressing what I had been guided to understand as the proper future of religion, that since God is at work in these multiple religions, if we're going to theologize about it, come up with a theory of the divine or ultimate reality, we've got to take in all the data. And that's Theology Without Walls. But in this particular prayer with me in October 21, God goes on and says, the radically personal center is correct. Everything else flows from that, including the soteriology. Well, there's actually a lot packed into that little brief communication from God to Jerry. The book ended up being called Radically Personal, and because everything starts from you, and I don't think I ever quite claimed this in the book, but it might be slight overstatement or misleading to some people, but you might say the instrument of revelation is you, and that at least your instrument of revelation, even if you accept some holy book or some holy teacher, figure, religious authority, institutional or personal, it's you who are accepting them, and it's you who are taking them in, and it's you who are understanding them and interpreting them. It's you who are applying them to your life. And all of that is radically personal. It has to make sense to you, and radically personal does not mean arbitrary or made up. Because the first thing I quoted, you trusting your spiritual senses, your intuition, your connection, your spiritual attunement to the divine reality. And that's a lot of work. That's a serious enterprise, as serious as it must be. I suppose great art critics must really have to spend some time studying a Kandinsky or something, or a Picasso or Rembrandt. It's not just they take a glance and say, oh, that's good or that's bad or something like that. No, these are serious enterprises. Understanding your own experience is a challenging activity and requires, there's a lot in radically personal and virtue epistemology, which says an awful lot of epistemology of deciding whether you're on the track to the truth has to do with your personal virtues. Are you conscientious in pursuing the truth? Are you muddy-headed in pursuing the truth? Do you believe every fool idea that passes by you? Well, then you're not doing a good job. Are you too critical? So you just throw out the baby with the bathwater. Nothing passes your filters, and then you live with an impoverished worldview. So these are all aspects of the radically personal understanding of everything. This is a general epistemology. I would apply it to ethics and your personal life and everything else. But in our context, it comes from that you are the instrument of revelation. It's you that God is working with, or however you want to put that. I'm a theist, and my whole experience is with the personal aspect of the divine reality, but there are other aspects as well. And what may come to you is an instrument of those kinds of divine presence or ultimate presence. And then you have to be attuned to those. Whatever is coming to you, you have to be tuned in to make sure you're capturing it correctly, applying it as best you can to your own life. But I did have one other experience recently that I thought would share in this context. This was quite recent. I don't know, in the past year sometime. I was just gone to bed and not fallen asleep yet. But more distinctly than usual, the voice came and said, "Go upstairs." And when I get one of these instructions, if I can sometimes check, is this really God talking? So I tune in or something, or even ask, Lord, is this you? That kind of question. But if I'm given instruction, I think this is God telling me to do something. I don't ask, oh, why? Give me a good reason. I'm just kind of obedient. Aye, sir, you might say. And I think there's some virtue in that. And maybe it has limitations as well. I don't know. But I think it's been an enabling factor, a facilitating factor in a lot of my experience with God. But anyway, I got out of bed. It was kind of cold. Hobbled up the stairs, not knowing what am I going to do when I get to the top of the stairs. The only instruction was go upstairs. Well, then I get to the top of the stairs and pause. I get the instruction. Start a public version of Theology Without Walls. A public Theology Without Walls. Why I had to be upstairs in the cold to get that instruction, I don't know. But, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And I didn't quite know what that meant, a public version of TWW. Theologian, religious studies scholars, these are all scholarly people. I'm an academic by by training and avocation. And so what would a public version of this be? And what kind of dawned on, as I talked to some others, what dawned on us is something focused on, what do the religions do? They answer our ultimate questions. They give different answers, and that's part of what's interesting, is they don't, whether they totally contradict each other isn't quite clear, but they certainly say a lot of different interesting things. They have a lot of insights of their own, and they're about these ultimate matters. And we all have these ultimate matters: life and death, love and loss, suffering, pain, death, obligation, duty, times where you've got to rise to the occasion. You're called to be courageous, and so on. These are very ultimate moments of human life that define the character of your life. They define your character. They define, you might say, your destiny. And so those questions will be addressed in this website. It's a Substack called Ultimate Questions. Several of the scholars that I think are particularly good at this kind of thing, it just, you might say, talking a little more the way normal people talk and aren't just dealing with ancient text and esoteric knowledge of different religious traditions, but also can tune into these life questions, really, life questions. So I've assembled a group of them, and we've started putting things, but it's not for them to pontificate. It's really, they're just priming the pump, hoping that you all will come share your thoughts, because questions will be posted. Question number 1 is about having a calling. Have you ever had a moment when you felt called to do something? As Abigail sometimes says, this task, it was a fight. This fight or task has my name on it. Is there just something that seems to have your name on it? You're kind of traveling, going to work or something, and here's someone in trouble. And maybe you've got to be somewhere at a certain time. Maybe you should go on and hope someone else, helps them. They've got a cell phone. They can call for help. But some other times you just feel somehow it comes to you, I should help that person. And that's one small kind of calling. But there are many kinds of callings. Every minister is supposed to have not just a job description that fits personality aptitudes and so forth, but is supposed to have a calling to the ministry or the priesthood or whatever. And there are a lot of things in our life, if you start thinking about it, where it might be you just feel a calling to keep a certain tradition going, or to be a person standing up for a certain kind of value, or to take a particular role in your family or your neighborhood or your workplace, or whatever it might be. So anyway, that's the question. And I think there are already 2 or 3 answers posted. The one I posted was I felt a calling to start this Ultimate Questions as a site. So that's kind of an easy one, But the next one I know that came in was profoundly interesting, and you might say not an easy calling, but their calling's great and small, and they're all of interest. And so I hope you'll consider checking out the website. It's a Substack, Ultimate Questions, and look at question number 1, and just if you can come up with something in your own experience relevant to that, just go ahead and put that in as a comment, and that will start generating some, I think, has the potential from some very, very interesting exchanges between people who are trying to live their life as best they can. And that's what we're mainly all trying to do, after all. So thanks for joining me here. Maybe this helps you and me live our life better. That's the hope, at least. Be well.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.